Alright, here we go. We are going to be making a dartboard cabinet. First things first, let me explain what's going on here. The theme of this project is using tools that I have laying around the garage. That being said, the DeWalt table saw I have is not working. The wheel that I'm supposed to use to make the blade go higher and lower is stuck. If anyone knows how to fix this, let me know in the comments because that would have made my life a lot easier in this video. My next best option is using a jigsaw. I'm using this beauty to cut the entire thing. Obviously, my biggest challenge is going to be making sure I cut everything in as straight of a line as possible. To make the entire cabinet, I picked up two 4x4 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood. The first few pieces I was cutting were the walls of the cabinet to be attached to the big back piece. There was a lot of sanding of the wood to make sure the wood wouldn't have any splinters. I didn't really buy the best wood. I wish I could sand this fast in real life. It would have made this thing go a lot quicker. Now for the satisfying part. Putting glue along the entire bottom piece of the cabinet. I used wood glue and screws to hold this entire thing together. The screws I were using were 3-inch screws, mainly meant for backyard decks, but like I said before, it's whatever I had laying around the garage. They're definitely overkill, but it is what it is. It'll just be the strongest dartboard cabinet ever. When I was drilling the pilot holes, I was making sure to take my time, make sure that the drill bit went straight in. Since I'm using such big screws, I didn't want the plywood to split, and I didn't want the screw poking out the sides, either the top or the bottom. These screws are so big, it was really a fight to get them in there. Looking back on it, I should have just went and got some smaller screws, but we made do. It's a really strong cabinet. Now I'm measuring out the circle in the middle of the cabinet. For reference, before I start putting the top pieces on, I want to make sure that dartboard is be centered right in the middle. I was getting real tired of doing all that sanding, so I switched spots with my camera crew. I picked this guy up on the corner. He said it'll work for free. All I had to do was give him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch.
Good job, man. Make that thing smooth.
We finished sanding all the top components to the cabinet. Now I'm measuring the gap that I'll use to put my LED wires inside. This side is where the LED light strip will be shining down on the dartboard, and on the other side where I was just measuring is where all that wiring is going to go. Again, I really had to take a lot of care drilling my pilot holes, especially to the right length, because if it wasn't the right length, that screw would go too deep and it would end up splitting the wood. Even though those 3-inch screws were a real pain to get in, as you can see, that back piece of wood was not completely straight, and those screws were able to keep that piece I just added pressed firmly against the back to flatten it out. It was so hard getting this screw in. I had the weirdest angle trying to get it in the sideways. It wasn't strong enough yet for me to put it on its side and just press down on it, and that's why I was struggling so bad. Here I'm putting the top piece on. I'm not using any glue on this piece. I'm only screwing it in because I'll need to take the top piece back off to access that little channel we made for the LED lights. Leaving this top piece not permanently glued there, if I ever need to fix the LED lights, it'll be no problem to switch them out. Now that I got the cabinet standing and it's able to support its own weight, you can see how bad I'm struggling just to get those screws in, even though I'm pushing down on it with my body weight. Make sure to click that like button for the mustache I'm sporting right now. Dust it off a little, admire what I've got. Nice. Now the entire cabinet is built and I have to work on the 2 doors. I don't have a table in the garage and I was tired of working on the floor for everything, so that's why it's on my lap right now. If you didn't drop a like for the mustache, you better drop a like for the jorts. It was starting to get hot outside, so I made these myself. Right now I'm making the screw hole for the hinges. Now I didn't want to go too deep because I didn't want to poke the hole right through the board, so I put the drill bit all the way up until it was the perfect length for the screw. This is the easiest way to do it, that way the drill will hit the board before you go through. These hinges were not the right hinges. The one I was using ended up sticking out the sides. But once it was finished, I actually don't mind the way it looks with the hinges poking out a little bit. It looks a bit more rustic. I had a pretty dark stain in the garage and had just enough to cover the entire thing. I haven't stained wood in a while, so at first I tried rubbing it on with a towel, but then I realized a brush was definitely the way to go because the towel fibers kept getting caught in the little strands of wood sticking out. The stain came out really nice and made all the grains in the wood pop out. Next it was time to start making the backdrop that would be behind the dartboard. I had a ton of corks that came from my family's restaurant, and this is actually why I had the project idea in the first place, is because I had so many corks laying around. To fasten all the corks to the wood, I used wood glue on each cork. This was pretty time consuming, but I finished the whole thing in a few hours. Against the walls of the cabinets, there had to be a lot of corks that were cut in half. At this point, I was just using a razor blade to cut them, which was working pretty well. I saw a lot online about having to boil them first to get a clean cut, but the razor blade was working fine. To fill in the gaps directly around the dartboard, I had to cut all the corks at angles to make them fit snug against the dartboard with as little gaps as possible. To do this a bit faster and more precise than using the razor blade, I used a miter saw, which was a bit of overkill to cut the corks, but it worked like a charm. Then it was just time for all the final touches. I put a molding around the top to give it a little bit of character. I put the doors on, put the handles on to match the hinges, and little magnets to keep the door shut. On the inside of one of the doors, I also put 2 dart holders I made out of a piece of leftover wood. I cut off the corners to give it a bit of a nicer look, and I drilled 3 holes in the top of each so that the darts would fit perfect in there. Lastly, I hooked up the LED lights underneath that channel and put a low profile switch to control them. I made a channel going down the back of the board to conceal the wires and have a little connector poking out of the bottom corner so that the wires can be attached and detached easily from the board. And that's everything. Now it's time for the final product. Recording this part right here?
I'm just getting closer, so like the persons that see this video, they want to know what's he building.
You're right.
So I'm just gonna get a little close.
Alright, you can end the video.
Okay.